Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of the 2022 Legal Leaders in MENA report. Today's launch will provide us with a unique insight and perspective from our esteemed panel. I want to take this opportunity to thank Richard Dean and our panel for being here today. I certainly look forward to listening to your conversation. At this point, I want to provide some background into why we commissioned this report. The last 2 years, as you probably agree, challenged us not only as a society, but also as a business and legal community. During this time, I noticed law firm demonstrating a unique resilience. We rolled out our sleeves and got back to work. And of course, there were changes to how we work, interact and collaborate with not only each other, but also with our clients. As a firm, we took stock of our journey and decided in the second half of 2021, it was time to capture insight of where we are at as a legal community. We wanted to understand from the region's legal decision makers their strategic priorities, investment objectives, risk and compliance, and how they see technology playing. With this in mind, we commissioned the Legal Leaders in MENA report. I'm proud to say the report captured the views of some 700 legal decision makers operating across 9 countries and 13 industry sectors in our markets. We've been diligent and thorough in a bid to deliver a report that has its fingers on the pulse of the legal community. This brings us to the launch. Our panelists will kickstart the conversation today. However, I would urge that as a legal community, we continue the dialogue, work closer with each other, interact more, and incorporate a more connected approach. This will help not only us, but our clients make sense of the increasingly sophisticated requirements of doing business in our region. At this point, I want to take a moment to recognize the significant efforts my colleagues at Al-Tamimi & Company had put into producing this report. They spent the last year working on this report, and I want to thank them for producing what I consider an excellent, insightful, and unique report. To our panelists, thank you for not only your participation today, but also for your ongoing support of the Legal Leaders in MENA report. Finally, I look forward to continuing the conversation with you after the launch of our report. And now, without further ado, I will hand over to Richard Dean to get the conversation started.
Sama, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's dive into the detail and 7 key themes in this report. First of all, legal enters the boardroom as decision makers. You've got ESG really rising up the legal agenda. Legal teams under the spotlight at the moment. The regulatory environment, it does need decoding. That's what we're hearing. You've got COVID, but it failed to deter investment. You've got Africa, massive focus on Africa as a continent in terms of investment. And finally, technology and innovation as drivers of growth. Let's get started. So let's meet our legal experts. First of all, to my right, Mona Mahdi from Henkel. Mona, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you. My name is Mona Mahdi. I am a U.S. qualified attorney. I'm currently legal director, head of legal and compliance with Henkel for the India, Middle East, and Africa region. I spent the first half of my career in private practice, primarily in corporate commercial and intellectual property law. And then I moved in-house with Unilever for about 12 years before moving to Henkel.
Thanks very much indeed, Mona. Great to have you with us. Then we have Arturo with us today. Arturo Ortiz de Zarate is with IBM.
Thanks very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure being with you today. Arturo Ortiz de Zarate. It's not an easy last name to pronounce, but you got it exactly right. I was born and raised in Mexico. I am currently the general counsel for IBM in the Middle East and Africa region. We currently conduct business and we have operation in around 68 countries in the region. Before being here, which by the way, I just landed in Dubai 7 months into this role. I was the general counsel for IBM in Latin America, which I had responsibility over all IBM's line of business across the region.
Thank you very much indeed. And then in the middle, we have, I guess in some ways, our host today. Isabella is with us, Isabella Zadkowska, a partner here at Al-Tamimi.
I'm very happy to be here with all those great panelists and with you today. I'm a corporate structuring partner with Altamimi and Company. I've been practicing law mainly in private practice over 18 years. I look after clients, corporate clients, family businesses, huge conglomerates, so a variety of things, but normally in the corporate structuring domain.
Good to have you with us. Thanks very much indeed for hosting us today. Representing the education sector, we have Jake Barnard with GEMS Education.
Thanks, Richard. Really pleased to be here, and thanks to Altamimi for having us. I'm the Group General Counsel for GEMS Education. We're headquartered here in Dubai. We have about 50 schools. I've been with GEMS for about 7 years, and I'm originally from the US and qualified in the US.
And finally, from the financial services sector, real pleasure to have with us Fozia Kehar from Citibank.
Thank you very much. I am the Regional General Counsel for Citi, covering Middle East and North Africa. That's about 17 jurisdictions. I've been with Citi for over 16 years. I've been a lawyer for far longer. I won't tell you how long. And I hail from Pakistan. And I've been here in Dubai, stationed here, for the last, a little over 13 years. So started in Pakistan and moved across with Citi to Dubai.
Fozia and all the panelists, it's great to have you with us. Thanks very much indeed. We've got about 40 minutes to dig into some of the issues that this report has unearthed. And Fozia, I'm going to start with you. And the issue of ESG, which came up so prominently in the report. 94% of legal decision makers regularly assess ESG risk and compliance within their role. So my question is this: is it really rising up the legal agenda, or is it just a trendy buzzword?
A trendy buzzword. No longer is it that. Regulators and policymakers across the board are now wisening up to the fact that this is going to be here to stay. Many companies have now issued across reports on their contribution towards ESG. Citi is one of them. We have a report that's come out very, very recently. In fact, clients of ours are now asking for ESG solutions, and banks tend to be helping them through with those as well. And ESG is not just the risks around environment, etc. It's also to do with the governance. It's to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. There's so many different aspects to it, and so no, it's here to stay for sure.
So, Mona, a similar question to you. Now, I can't imagine you're going to say, no, ESG is irrelevant, we don't even think about it. I'm sure you do. But specifically, as it impacts your world at Henkel, give us a couple of examples. How is it impacting what you do?
Sure. I think, if we look at the FMCG industry in general, I think it's become a non-negotiable. It's no longer a nice to have on all fronts when you look at, the different components of ESG. So, when we talk about sustainability, it's at the forefront in the industry. So if we look at Henkel, for example, we support, we have goals supporting sustainability in terms of circular and net zero future for the organization. So things like circular use of water and production waste, eco-friendly packaging, even in the offices, the reduction of the use in single-use plastics. And then also on the social front, we look at how we can help support thrive the communities in which we operate across various fronts. So education, well-being, various fronts like that. And of course, as Fozia mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion are very important. So one of the goals that we have is to reach gender parity across all management levels by 2025. And then, of course, post-pandemic, one of the areas that's also come to the forefront when we look at the impact of the pandemic across our people within the organization is mental health and well-being, and focusing on that as well. And then, overarching all of that, of course, is a very strong governance framework and the importance of that.
Just a quick follow-up question, Fozia, for you and for Mona. In terms of the legal compliance with ESG, both of you cover extensive regions and very diverse regions, and each will have its own legal requirements and codes of conduct, and they will be coming out even more over the next couple of years. Mona and then Fozia, how do you manage that from a legal compliance perspective when it comes to ESG?
You know, this region is very diverse in terms of the different types of jurisdictions in which we operate and the local challenges, regulatory, market practices, that sort of thing. So I think we have to look outwards as well to the partners that we choose in those jurisdictions, all the way down the supply chain line, for example, to ensure that, you know, who we partner with, where we source from, et cetera, have the same types of code of ethics and principles by which we operate, and that theirs are in line with ours.
And Fozia, from you, what are the challenges you face from a legal perspective or a compliance perspective operating in so many different countries, all with broadly similar legislations, but all slightly different?
No, I'd second everything Mona said, of course, but you know, for us, the message starts from the top of the house. And you'd agree that other countries, you know, across the board, not just, I mean, I'm not talking just about MENA, but beyond MENA, there's a lot of development that's happened on the ESG front. MENA, thus far, in terms of what I've seen, to make ESG, you know, an absolute agenda in terms of their financial reports, in terms of whatever's happening around them and the way they do business, essentially. And I think, again, to Mona's point, it's who we partner with, it's firms such as yourselves, at Al-Tamimi, it's other concerns across the board that we rely on heavily to keep us sort of alert in terms of the regulatory developments that are coming up.
I think most companies are going to need to be ahead of regulation. It's one of the few areas where I think your other stakeholders are going to demand that you're ahead of regulation. You know, you got investment funds that won't invest in you if you don't have an ESG agenda. You know, it's not regulatory driven. I know for us, you know, we've got a lot of young kids that are really, really conscious about environmental stuff. They learn this in schools. They're going to look at you as an organization. You know, what are you doing? You're doing your part. So I feel from the top with investors and from the bottom with customers, they're going to demand more than you, than I think regulation can keep up.
So Isabella, as a couple of people have mentioned, they turn to firms like yours, often these guys, for advice and guidance. But the regulatory or the legislative landscape is changing so fast. The report revealed that more than half, 51%, of the legal decision makers, like these guys, believe sudden changes to regulatory policy is a key challenge within their role. And they pick up the phone to you when that happens. One example, you've identified the UAE issuing 40 new laws at the end of last year. So my question is this: what impact does this have on business processes, and how do you, as a legal advisor, approach this?
In fact, you know, that's a very broad topic, I think. And in the context of that question, immediately two things come to mind. That the number of the legislation that we've seen lately in the UAE is a very positive development. It's a very good indicator of the authorities realizing how much has been changing in the business environment, and that the world that we live in, our 2022, is a very fast-moving animal, if you like, in comparison to decades ago, when legislation was, of course, amended by jurisprudence, but that really didn't have to happen at the same pace that is happening today. But the changes do pose a challenge. On one hand, as a legal practitioner, I would say, okay, part of our profession is making sure that we're on top of the changes. When we enter the profession, we know that there will be changes, and it's our responsibility as legal practitioners to keep ourselves up to date. But practically, as human beings, with those 40 new pieces of legislation, of course, it becomes a challenge. And it's a challenge twofold, I would say. First of all, for us, in-house meaning in our private practice roles, where we have our teams and respective expert lawyers. What the number of new legislation has actually meant for us is that we have to specialize very narrowly as legal practitioners to make sure that in our respective areas of expertise, we really follow all the changes that happen. So we've got dedicated lawyers who look into those specific changes of law and who become experts in their narrow areas. So there is much more narrowing of areas of speciality. On the other hand, there is a challenge that we face in terms of communicating those changes to our clients, to Fuzia, to Jake, to Mona, or to Arturo. Because then with all those changes, we know, okay, on one hand, we want to make sure our clients are up to date with the changes, but up to date with the changes that concern their businesses. We don't want to bombard our clients with communication just for the sake of it, because then each of the lawyers practicing in-house would be getting so much communication on a daily basis. So again, and then to filter that communication well, we also have systems internally within our firm where we actually check the client sector of operation, the geographical coverage by the client business. So we would say, okay, well, where would Henkel have presence throughout the region where actually those changes are happening, right? So that's how we would then approach the huge number of new legislation being enacted.
So Arturo, from your perspective, I guess it's a two-part question. Firstly, you arrived here late last year and suddenly you're hit with 40 new laws in one country alone. I mean, how did you react to that? But secondly, in terms of turning to legal consultants for subject matter expertise, how do you approach that when things are changing so quickly?
Exactly. And I think Isabella touched on a very important topic, right? And a very important point. I mean, when I opened the newspaper, I walked into the office one of these mornings and I saw headlines in the newspapers, 40 new laws enacted in the UAE. I almost fainted, right? I mean, this is something that, it doesn't happen in other parts of the world, or at least you are engaged in some of the, discussions before this legislation makes it out of Congress, right? So I remember going to my desk, opening the newspaper and going through all the set of new regulations. And I did what, Isabel just did. It's like, I started focusing on which of these set of legislations is going to affect my business. So all of this, 28, 30, I may put it to the side. I may devote some time after to see what the impact this is going to have on my business or potentially my clients, right? Because we engage also with companies in our business. But you centralize on the 2, 3, or 4 pieces of legislation that are actually going to affect your impact immediately. And then you start getting the set of experts, right, to decide how you're going to react to this. For example, taking as an example the labor law, right? We definitely immediately got in contact with Altamimi to say, look, you know our operations, you know how we do business. Can you give us an assessment on how this is going to impact our business? But of course, you also have to get your other stakeholders. You need to get in touch with human resources. You get in touch with finance. And then at the end, you have to make decisions very quickly, right? And I think this is when having a good network of colleagues in the region, solid support from outside counsel, and then you just exercise the judgment and you take the decision because you're given a very short time to react. So that has been, my experience so far with the, fast-paced environment that you're seeing in the region.
If I could just add to that, so that could be a bit of an ask, right? Just to be able to get a bit of lead time as you go about implementing the regulation. And of course, also getting a chance to participate in consultation around a proposed legislation, which doesn't always happen. And even if it does happen, I've seen that we don't always see the changes that are being proposed or the suggestions that are being made actually making their way back to the regulation, in that it still comes out perhaps in the same way that it was set out to be.
And I think to Fauzia's point, if I look at the FMCG industry that I've been in for quite a few years now, we do sometimes find ourselves with a surprise piece of regulation or decree that starts out in one jurisdiction and then, spreads to surrounding jurisdictions where you don't really have advance warning. All of a sudden, it's effective immediately, and you find that it ends up hindering your production almost immediately with an inability to do business. So you have to firefight, deal with the immediate issue, and then in parallel, try to understand what was the root cause of that regulation coming out or that rule coming out. It could be in relation to raw materials, for example. And then sometimes you find that perhaps the root is maybe some lack of awareness or misinformation. So then you work on that front as well in terms of raising awareness and educating and hoping to mitigate the situation and have a follow-up to that initial piece of regulation.
So Isabella, if I can just ask a very quick selfish question as a journalist, a radio and TV presenter. The question we often get from our listeners and viewers, who are often people like you, they're business owners or business managers, and you'll get a new piece of legislation come out, like you say, in the newspaper. We had one recently about employment insurance or unemployment insurance. And so many questions, and we're getting questions. And so my producers will say, right, let's pick up the phone and get a lawyer from Al-Tamimi on the show tomorrow morning to answer these questions. But all you've had initially is the same piece in the newspaper that everyone else has read. The detail comes sometime later on. So how do you manage that process with your clients when they've got so many questions and you literally don't know because you haven't got the full legislation? It hasn't been gazetted, for example.
Yes. Yes, and that's a very good practical question. We get ourselves into that situation pretty often. And then with clients, what we would do is, of course, we discuss the legislation with them. We mention how we believe the legislation will be interpreted based on our experience with the authorities, within the given legislative framework. Oftentimes, myself or my colleagues are involved with authorities in the process of drafting the legislation or even the consultation papers. And then that gives us a little bit more background to what drove the legislation, what approach the authorities may take in enacting the legislation and then maybe enforcing them. Then even if there are no penalties imposed by the legislation for the breach of certain legal provisions, we then are able to brainstorm with clients what we believe could be the practical approach the authorities will take. But always, if we are in doubt, again, in line with our duties, we advise clients that, again, our advice is still provided at an early stage. We need to see in practice how authorities end up interpreting that legislation. Because again, at the end of the day, it's more about the years of practice under given legislation that will illustrate to us how the authorities wish to interpret that, not necessarily the initial period of drafting itself. That may change later.
I can see that helping to draft the legislation would give you an edge. The best way to predict the future is to invent the future. Jake, you were going to jump in.
I was just going to say, I think one nice thing about UAE is they look to other jurisdictions for some of their laws. And the nice thing about UAE is a lot of lawyers are from different jurisdictions, particularly a large firm like Tamimi. So there are some directional clues sometimes in new legislation, even though it's not fully implemented. You can look at, for example, the competition law and say, this is clearly picking some things from the EU. We imagine they'll probably do the rest, and the data protection law. So while there's 40 new laws, there's not 40 new concepts. And so I think we're all aware of, this is a flavor in the US, this is in the EU. It might be a mixture of this. These are the type of things that apply to all. You could do easily now.
And just to elaborate on that a little bit, as Jake said, we would then also sometimes look into what other jurisdictions have done with similar regimes. Data protection regime in the DIFC is a good example, because again, it was based on the developments in relation to data protection that were adopted by the European Commission and the European Union member states. And then that was actually a source for many of our practitioners of really interpretation, possible interpretation that could be adopted under DIFC law.
We've recently seen a change to the DIFC, LCIA platform. It just went away. And a lot of companies were just getting comfortable around that particular paraphernalia. And then overnight, almost, to be then opening up to the DIAC platform, where the rules were yet to follow. That kind of uncertainty leaves you in a bit of a state of limbo. So that should perhaps be avoided as well.